Miss 12, should we get started?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Alrighty,
Okay.
Hi everyone. On behalf of the Executive Committee, I would like to welcome and thank you all for zooming in during today's webinar. During the webinar today, we will listen to 4 inspiring speakers who will talk about researching and working through this level 4 period and how their research could promote wellness for older people who are also in level 4 lockdown. All speakers today are on the executive of the NZAG and are at your service to do their best to get older people through this global crisis in the best shape possible. After our 4 presentations today, we'll have approximately 20 minutes for a virtual panel discussion, and I would like to highlight, please keep your microphone muted. If you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A section, which you can find on the bottom of your screen next to the chat function. And after the last presentation, I will moderate the discussion by asking as much of your questions as I can. If you have any specific questions for one of the speakers, please note their names in the question so I can address the questions. Right. And with that said, it is a pleasure to introduce our first speaker of today. Our first speaker is Dr. Ngaire Cheung. After working full-time as a specialist old age psychiatrist for 8 years, he joined the Department of Psychological Medicine of the University of Auckland in 2012 and currently holds a joint appointment. He is the Director of Academic Program for the Auckland Regional Psychiatric Training Program and is one of the very few researchers studying suicidal behavior in older people in New Zealand. He is a principal investigator and member of Brain Research New Zealand, and besides collaborating nationally with the Inter-Eye research team at the University of Canterbury, he also collaborates internationally with Inter-Eye teams across the world. He is currently, in response to COVID-19, in the process of adapting a face-to-face, evidence-based psychosocial group program for people with dementia, and is adapting that to an online group, and will tell us more about that now. Ngaire, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Lara, for your introduction. So I'll get my PowerPoint up and share this with you. So this is current work actually. So I'm very excited to share this work with you today. Here we go. Okay, so what we are doing now is because of the COVID-19 situation, we are moving a face-to-face evidence-based group program for people with dementia from face-to-face to online. This is something we never thought about to as a way of delivering this treatment, but because of the COVID-19, we have to do it. So it's actually an opportunity for us. Now, these are my lovely facilitators. We have our meeting yesterday on Zoom, so you'd be familiar with the Zoom now, no doubt. So because we have more than 10 people in our group, so we are categorized as a cluster according to the Ministry of Health. But you may recognize some of the people here these people are working with me at the moment, and they are the people actually delivering the online treatment. So we have Kathy Perry. I'm not going to go through everybody, but you can see that we have organized dementia organization, Alzheimer's organization involved in this. So I want to tell you something about cognitive stimulation therapy, because you need to know about the background of our face-to-face program and to understand how we move the face-to-face to online. So CST is a group treatment, structured group treatment for people with mild to moderate dementia. The background concept is based on reality orientation, validation, reminiscence, and cognitive stimulation. The first RCT in the UK was published in 2003, and CST was included in the World Alzheimer's Report in 2011 as an evidence-based treatment. It certainly was included in the NICE guidelines in the UK in 2006 and the revised version in 2018. So about 75% of the memory services in the UK deliver CST as part of their core business. Evidence was shown in the Cochrane review in terms of improving people's cognition and quality of life. And some of you will be familiar with the Livingston Lancet report in 2017. And in the report, CST was recommended as the cognitive intervention with the strongest evidence. The program is pretty simple. 7 to 8 people with dementia come together twice a week for 7 weeks. That is the program. That is the evidence. Now, people, after the 7 weeks, people can go on to maintenance treatment. And in fact, most people will do that. And certainly the organisation we work with continue to deliver the maintenance treatment until the person not getting benefit from it. So even though it says 24 weeks, but you go on for as long as the person get benefit. It can be delivered in the community and residential care setting, and can be delivered by a range of health workers and volunteers. So in 2018, Kathy Perry and I were delivering 10 of these workshops up and down the countries and trained probably about 200 people up and down the country. It's a 1-day standardized training. Training here in New Zealand is the same in the UK, where this was developed. There's a little photo of one of our training workshops that was in Selwyn Village. So the structure, the hour, when the people come together with 2 facilitators, 6 to 8 people with dementia, the structure is very structured. So we start off with the group name, the song, some orientation, discuss current affairs, what's on the news, and then move on to the main activity. And depending on the level of the people's cognition, it can be level A, which is a bit harder, level B is less complex, and there's a menu that comes with it. So it's really easy for the facilitators after the training to go out and deliver this treatment. And then at the end of the hour, a theme song again, and then reminders for the next session. So how did the virtual CST come about? So this is a photo of Queenstown. Kathy, Perry and I were invited to go to Queenstown, not skiing, but to deliver a training workshop. This training workshop was scheduled on the 31st of March. So Alzheimer's Otago invited us to do that. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we have to postpone that. And the manager at Alzheimer's Otago said, well, can you do the training online? It's a 1-day training, and it's pretty boring if you sit in front of Zoom for a whole day. But somehow I came up with this idea about why don't we look at delivering CST online? And the reason I suggested that was because Queenstown already have 2 CST groups. With the lockdown, they want to continue to provide a service for people with dementia. So the next things, I connected up with the existing CST program, not all of them, but certainly these are my friends. So they get the email from me very quickly. And so we have people in Queenstown, Nelson, Blenheim, 2 groups in 2 organisations, Wellington, Taranaki, and 2 organisations in Auckland. So we started to, we have to use this Zoom as a media for our forum to connect with facilitators. So far we have 3 meetings. We had one yesterday. We're having 2 weekly meetings at the moment. And the idea of these meetings are to allow us to peer review our work with online treatment, share our learning challenges, and share online resources as well. Because this is something new for all of us, I think it's important to have this in our process. And I have contacted our colleagues in the UK, and they're not doing the virtual CST at the moment. I think there's planned to do that. I'm not sure where they're at the moment. So the intended outcome of our meetings, we'll continue to meet, is to produce a practical guide on virtual CST. So the forum certainly have allowed us, Kathy Perry and I, the international trainers, allow us to support our facilitators. Because before this, we had the 1-day training workshop, and people will go back to their workplace and start delivering CST, and didn't get much support from us. But now with Zoom, it's actually a great opportunity for us to be together. And I also offer to co-facilitate the group, the online group. So at 1 o'clock, I've got a group with Dementia Wellington. That will be my first virtual CST. I'm really looking forward to it. So we are taking a lead on virtual CST here. I want to share some learning so far. So some of the learning is related to technology. So about half of the people who normally come to the face-to-face CST have access to Zoom. We discussed the optimal number. Normally we have 6 to 8 people in one group, but with Zoom, and it can be overwhelming for people with dementia, we suggested the number to be 3 to 5, so lower the number. We have, this is from Auckland, now Dementia Auckland. One of the groups have, I think they're running 3 groups at the moment, but they have people who live alone, 3 people live alone. But they were able to join Zoom with some coaching from the facilitator, helping them to connect via telephone and messenger. And that's amazing. That's something I never thought that could happen. But otherwise, people with dementia are supported by their care partners or supporters at home to connect with Zoom. And the facilitators are telling me that by the 3rd session, the carers are getting better with the technology. The content on the session, we need to do some adjustment with the song because of the internet transmission. So it can't be too fast. So we have to slow down the pace for that. We have a chair yoga video because exercise is an important component in any intervention for older people. One of the facilitators tried to play the chair yoga. So it was a bit hard to follow. I've learned about the armchairs tours on YouTube, so this is part of the resources we're sharing. I've never heard of armchair tours, but there's a number of them on YouTube, and we can use that as a resource as part of the stimulation technique during the session. Some people, with the maintenance session, usually is once a week. Some facilitators are thinking increasing it twice a week to increase that social connection during the lockdown. I think this is nothing evidence-based, this is the facilitators' observations. People are getting benefits. They already know each other prior to the online sessions with the group, face-to-face group. So they can recognize each other online and connect with each other. They can follow the activities put together by the facilitators. And the most important thing is they're having fun. The other thing is related to carer. Carers actually want to join the sessions on Zoom because they also enjoy the activities. But facilitators are already observing some increase in their carer stress with the lockdown. And also something I want to share with this group here. So that's my email address. We welcome anyone who have an interest in delivering online therapy for older people. If you're interested in virtual CST, please give me please email me. We welcome anybody. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was great, Gary. Thank you so much for that. Very, very interesting. And hopefully we'll generate some questions. I want to highlight again, if you do have some questions, just pop them down in a question and answer section. We've been reading in the background that the sound has been a bit echoey and a bit distorted. Hopefully that was just Gary's internet connection, but we'll keep an eye out for everyone for the next couple of presentations. In saying that, I'll introduce the next speaker, who is Professor Debra Waters, the Director of Gerontology Research at the University of Otago. She works very closely with Age Concern Otago and is part of the Southern-wide multi-sector Falls Governance Group. And besides all the great work that she does for our New Zealand older adults, she also holds a research appointment at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center in the US and has collaborators in France and the Netherlands. Her research is mainly focused on falls prevention and body composition changes with aging. And today her talk will provide an overview of the recommended type, frequency, and duration of home-based exercises and also evidence-based programs on the internet to help maintain strength, balance, and gait. Debra, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate the introduction. Get my slides up here. All right, where do we start? There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about maintaining strength and balance at home. And just to start out with, we're just showing you a bit of what the changes are that happen with aging, just pure aging. And on the left-hand side, you can see this is a graph looking at a one-legged stand with eyes open and eyes closed. You can see that's a little grainy on the bottom, but that's about age 40. It starts as kind of decline that just steadily goes down to your well into your 90s, which again happens much more fast and a much steeper trajectory when you have your eyes closed starting at about the age of 50. And then if you look on the right-hand panel, this is looking at strength-trained men and untrained men across aging. And it's quite clear to see that at age 30, you start to see a decline in men who are not strength-trained that continues well on into the 80s. But strength training does appear to mitigate a lot of this loss earlier in life, and then you start to lose it a little bit later on at later ages. So we know now that there's lots of benefits from doing strength or resistance training or weight training, which is it's referred to. And this is a nice review by Levin that came out in the journal Physiology in 2019. And if you're interested in kind of more the genetics and physiological changes that go on with strength training, I'd encourage you to look at that review. It's quite nice. But this schematic kind of shows nicely what changes are across a different range of neuromuscular benefits. And that would be increases in strength, as I just showed you in that previous slide, increases in power, which is strength per unit time, increases in mobility, motor unit integration, increased balance, a shift in fiber type, because when you're doing strength resistance training, you're using more of the fast twitch muscle fibers, which are more prone to decrease with aging and sarcopenia, and also muscle hypertrophy. So many, many benefits that come from resistance training and have been researched over the years. So what do we actually say that we should be doing with this training? Well, the American College of Sports Medicine and many other sports medicine organizations recommend that older adults do 2 resistance training sessions per week. And that's been a recommendation for decades. Not many people do that. But the training benefits come from how you actually design these resistance training sessions. So you've got the number of sets, which you're doing for different body parts. You've got repetitions within those sets. You've got the frequency, which is how many times a week you are doing it. You've got the intensity, which is how much weight you're actually lifting. So there are a lot of things that can be manipulated that result in all those physiological benefits I showed you on the previous slide. But interestingly, in this review, again by Levin, they found that there's a minimal effective dose of 1 day a week to promote changes. And we've got data, and I'll show you some of that data, that is actually does occur. Maximum is up to 3 days a week, but then there were lots of other research that said that really the frequency wasn't the most important thing. It seemed to be the sets, the repetitions, the intensity that was driving a lot of the physiological changes, more so than just the number of days per week. Detraining, and this is what we're really dealing with in the COVID-19 situation, is that people are not doing as much, possibly, if an older adult is just in their home. And if you have a person who's been in a strength training program for 12 weeks, and we can see, and you see big changes in a 12-week period, and I'll show you that in older people as well, you actually can preserve that with, again, a minimal dose of 1 high intensity set per muscle group per week. So that's not a lot of activity, that's a low frequency, but high intensity. So if you don't do that maintenance dose, you're going to lose everything you gained in that 12-week period within 8 weeks. It'll be back down to baseline. So there's some serious, significant changes that go on with detraining and strength. And from this systematic review looking at balance training, they found that you needed about 11 to 12 weeks to see, again, a big change, a big improvement in balance. Frequency was this 3 sessions a week, which seems to be the magic number. And the duration was 30 to 45 minutes, but they didn't really look at the minimum dose as they did with the strength training review, but we have some evidence just from our little bit of research that actually 1 day a week, if you're doing 45 minutes, you can also get significant improvement. And what we saw this was we did an evaluation of the Steady As You Go program, which is the community-based Otago exercise program exercises. And this meets once a week for 45 minutes. And in this evaluation, which was a quasi-experimental design, we had 3 groups. The group on the top, that yellow line, is the group that is peer-led Steady As You Go participants. So the peer, when they come into the Steady As You Go, they go for 10 weeks with a trained professional teaching the class, and then they convert to peer. So that's that group. The red line is a group that had never been exposed to Steady As You Go, and the blue line was a control group that did seated exercises. So the intervention was 10 weeks, and you can see in that red group, the age concern who had never been exposed to it, they had a big improvement in their 30-second chair stand, which is a measure of strength, muscle strength, and also muscle endurance. And you can see that the other group that was a peer-led, that had been doing the exercises, actually had higher function than any of the other groups. So they maintained better function, and they also were able to improve slightly over that 12-month period. Similarly, with the step touch, this is a dynamic balance test. You're standing and you're just touching your foot on a step without stepping up. And so again, we've got the group that was not exposed, the red group that came in new to the Steady As You Go, and they had a huge improvement in their step touch and continue to improve at 12 to 12 months. And the peer-led group had, again, much greater function initially at baseline, improved slightly, and then continue to improve at 12 months. So we did have evidence that, yes, indeed, you can see pretty significant changes and improvements to get people into normative standards for these tests and other tests that we were measuring. So what is the Otago exercise program Steady As You Go? Well, they're basically constructed of these components. They've got a warm up and cool down and a conditioning. The warm up and cool down is flexibility for different exercises, something like the hamstring stretch seated. They have eye exercises where you're following you're moving your hands and following your eyes with your hands. Your eyes follow your hands. You got conditioning exercises, which is strengthening exercises, 5 different kinds of exercises, including the sit to stand, 20 repetitions, which is quite a robust exercise. Standing balance, again, 5 exercises, including like a one-legged stand and other kinds of balance. And then walking practice, usually 3 different kinds, doing a figure 8, walking through the chairs, and walking heel to toe, walking sideways. Those are the kinds of walking practice. So those are the kind of exercises that are in that 45-minute program. So what can we do now that people aren't able to access these Steady As You Go community-based programs? Well, Age Concern Wellington put together a YouTube video, and this is Leslie, she's their health promotion coordinator up in Wellington, and she took a modified Steady As You Go program and made a YouTube video, and you can see she's in her garden because she was already in self-isolation, but it is a 38-minute program available. That's a URL. Anyone can download it. Age Concern Otago also has a program, which is the full Steady As You Go program. They are offering that through a private Facebook account right now, which is for people who have already attended the 10-week program, and then they're going to carry on and do a step-by-step that actually will show the whole program as well as the walking. Another thing that can be done at home is something called functional training. And this is quite interesting. This came from another systematic review on functional training and its ability to improve physical function. And it's basically set up as element-based, task-based, or hybrid-based. So element-based would be you'd be doing squats, just as you would do to squat to pick down something. You would do just a little modified squats. Task-based would be things like chair rising. So you get out of a chair, that's a specific task. So you would practice chair raising at different speeds or different chair heights. Hybrid is performing a daily task in a slightly challenging way. So if you're standing and you're washing dishes, you might stand in tandem with your feet heel to toe, or stand on one leg, or you might do little mini squats. So these have been found to be really quite effective in actually improving physical function as well, and can be easily done at home. And gardening, and we know people like to garden, and it's kind of getting to the end of the gardening season, but people still can get out into their gardens, at least down here in Dunedin it is. And this was another systematic review, and they found heterogeneity, which means that just the research had a lot of differences in the way the research was designed and conducted and things were measured. But despite that, they did find that gardening as a single activity does promote overall health, quality of life, physical strength, fitness and flexibility, and cognitive ability. So what I've shown you is that, yes, periods of no exercise do lead to significant loss in strength and balance, but in a reasonably short period of time. But strength and balance can be improved and also maintained with even 1 to 2 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes each session. And also, I didn't mention, but what you can also do is the sessions can be broken down into smaller time frames. There's research to show that if people do 10-minute segments and build up to 30 or 40 minutes a day, they get the same benefits as if they did it all at one time. So if you've got someone who's more frail and can't tolerate that level of exercise, they can do smaller segments and build up to that. We now have SayGo on YouTube and Facebook. Also, the Otago exercise program is available on YouTube. University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill has created YouTubes of all the different individual Otago exercise program exercises. Those are freely available. You've got functional exercises, and you've got gardening. So there are things that can really be done reasonably easily and safely in the home. Thank you.
Wonderful, that was great. Thank you so much, Debra, for that presentation. That gives us some great guidelines on staying active with and for ourselves, possibly for older adults in our homes. The next speaker will also give us hopefully some great guidelines, but then on sleep in older adults, because our next speaker will be Rosie Gibson. Rosie has a background in psychology and clinical sleep medicine and is currently a research officer at the Sleep Wake Center at Mass University, where she leads projects within the sleep and aging and dementia profile. She's a co-investigator on the Aging Well Through Eating, Sleeping, Socializing and Mobility program, a research funded by the National Science Challenge. She is also a recipient of a HRC Emerging Researcher and a Lotteries postdoc for her work exploring sleep as a predictor for transitions to formal care and gaining a better understanding of how sleep changes with advancing age for older Maori and non-Maori. Besides her extensive work nationally, Rosie also serves on the research committee of the Australian Sleep Association and is an advisor on an Australian Sleep Health Foundation project regarding sleep deficits of Australian carers. Today, she will provide an overview of sleep-related changes and some tips for their management with the older population in mind. Rosie, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you for that extensive introduction. Hello, everyone. Right, so I'm going to share my screen. Thank you. So, yeah, today I want to share a little bit about what we already know with what changes with sleep and aging, but obviously with a specific focus on the COVID-19 alert level 4 situation, and hopefully share some tips and yeah, and what we're doing in the research space in this area. But I think, you know, the most important message is obviously in this situation, everybody's routines have really been kind of thrown out a little bit, and there's a lot of anxiety around what's going on and uncertainty. So it's not really a surprise that sleep is something that's disrupted. It's quite normal. But as we adapt, I think it is important to remember that sleep can help with our immune system and our general health and well-being. So it is it's an important area to try and maintain good sleep health even while we're going through these changes. So what we know about sleep and aging already through our research is that about 20 to 30% of older adults will report some kind of sleep problems. And this is likely underreported because many older people do normalise the sleep changes that come with aging and get quite used to the changes and don't necessarily consider it problematic. So it may well be more than that. But when they do report sleep problems, we find that this is associated with poorer physical and mental health, so more likely to have pain, depression, anxiety, or cardiovascular disease, and also falls and hospital admittance. So sleep has really been identified as a pillar of health for aging well. What we also know is as we get older, that it's not so much the demographic predictors for sleep. So for younger populations, we need to see that gender and ethnicity play a role, but as we get older, it is more likely the health situation. And obviously, those people with dementia and carers have really unique sleep problems as well. There's lots of factors that affect sleep health in general. As we get older, people are more likely to have primary sleep disorders like sleep apnea and insomnia, restless legs and so on. And also all the other health conditions that come with aging, and their medications often have an impact on sleep quality as well. And there's neurophysiological changes, so there's deterioration to areas of the brain associated with sleep, which make keeping sleep as regular and as efficient less than ideal. So this, yeah, all declines with aging, and even more so with dementias and so on. But it's these three areas that I think we can focus on a little bit today, because these are the areas that maybe we can adapt, especially in the COVID situations. So sleep is also associated with our psychosocial context, what kind of prime cues we're exposed to, as well as our sleep hygiene, which is kind of the behaviours and routines around sleep. So I'll try and focus a bit on these today. So looking at sleep regulation, first of all, this little graph here shows that there's two processes that we need to keep our sleep regulated. And the top bit there is what we call sleep load, which is essentially a pressure to feel sleepy or fall asleep. And that just increases as the time goes on between being from when we were last asleep. So the longer we're awake, the more sleepy we feel. We get more pressure to be sleepy. And as you can see, this increases. And what stops us from falling asleep in the afternoon and so on is this circadian alerting signal. And this is a physiological signal that helps to keep us awake as the afternoon and into the early evening goes on, until they kind of meet at the middle, and then this drops down and we kind of plummet into sleep. So they kind of work together to keep us alert and active in the daytime and asleep at night time. And as we get older, unfortunately, these rhythms aren't as robust, the amplitude isn't as great anyway. And one way we can keep them more robust is to expose ourselves to the cues that are necessary to keep this alerting signal strong. And so the main signal we use is bright light. So there's a pathway from the eye that goes directly to the area of the brain that's responsible for our sleep timing, our circadian body clock in the hypothalamus. And so the alerting signal and this body clock actually kind of ticks just over 24 hours a day. So we need to keep it in sync with the external world. So light's our main cue for doing that. And then when we go into darkness, then that helps to secrete the correct hormones and so on, the melatonin, to make us feel sleepy and to stay asleep at night time. So light's the main cue, but also things like physical activity and social activities and how routine we are with these all help to keep that body clock in step. As we get older, things like being less physically able to get out into the environment and natural bright light, as well as conditions of the eye which prevent us being able to get as much light in, they already have play a role in the body clock becoming less robust. But obviously with the COVID situation, there's an increased challenges to keeping this body clock entrained. What's also good to note, or useful to note, is that our sleep efficiency also changes with aging. So what we call our sleep architecture, so these graphs, these are quite old, from an old piece of research, but anecdotally, the top graph is sleep stages for a younger adult, and we can see that we go from wake through to stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is a nice deep sleep, and we have these periods of REM, which is our dreaming sleep through the nighttime, and sometimes the odd awakening. But anecdotally, what our kind of overnight sleep studies show for older adults is there's a lot more periods of wakefulness in the nighttime and less of the deep sleep and dreaming sleep. So quite a lot of older adults report feeling less refreshed with their sleep, even if they're spending the same amount of time in bed, because they're having a bit more time awake. And indeed, it's not also that unusual for older people to report having a long period of wakefulness in the night and essentially a split sleep. And again, this is quite normal with aging, but it can be quite frustrating for some people that they're spending a lot of time awake in the night time. So the recommendation is about 6 or 7 hours for people who are aged over 65, but certainly in my research we find a lot of people report a lot less than this, or sleeping in chunks across the daytime. So it's not something to worry too much about. And I've put this slide in here because really it's important to think of sleep health as not just the duration or the timing of sleep, but also how satisfied people are with their sleep, how they're feeling in the daytime, as well as how regular the timing is. So when the stability of sleep comes unstuck, we do also see implications for health. So when we're looking at sleep, we're looking at sleep health in general rather than sleep disorders and maintaining good quality sleep. So all these dimensions are useful, and for all of us, but especially for older people, I think, to optimize aging well. During level 4, what we're seeing, there's a few, there's research and there's anecdotal stuff coming out online now, what's going on. But for us in New Zealand, level 4 came up quite quickly, and we had an abrupt change to how our days are scheduled. And this means that we have less regular sleep timing, along with our waking routine. We're not now governed by work routines or social routines. So this does mean that we might be eating at different times of day, engaging in social activities not at all, or at strange times of day, reading a lot of the news at strange times of day, and possibly sleep's coming out of whack. There's also reduced opportunities for maybe getting that natural light exposure and exercise and social connecting, which are the key factors for keeping that body clock entrained and keeping a robust sleep-wake cycle. So what we really need to think about is opportunities, particularly for older people who either can't or don't want to get out into natural light, how we can help them, especially to get exposure to that, to keep their body clocks entrained. Another key factor that's affecting our sleep is obviously there's a state of uncertainty and a lot of stress and anxiety over the COVID situation. So a lot more symptoms of insomnia, so not being able to get to sleep or stay asleep at night, and also erratic dreams and COVID-related nightmares as a side effect of this. And just engaging, getting used to the new social norms is actually also making people feel very tired during the day. So regardless of how good or bad their sleep was, we have this kind of overarching feeling of exhaustion, which is maybe more associated to the new moral decisions we're having to make, even making choices about who's going to supermarket, how do you go to sleep. Everything has changed, and it is actually mentally quite exhausting. So sometimes we need to be aware that even if we feel tired or exhausted, it might not actually be related to the quality of sleep we had. It's just a crazy situation, and it's okay to feel like that. So these are some of the tips. We've got a whole heap of resources on our website now that we've developed about sleep and COVID, including, I've got one there for older adults, but there's one for mental health and for children and all sorts, so you can have a look at those. But essentially the idea is to try and keep a really consistent routine with sleep, keeping the bedroom a sleep safe zone and really protecting that. So trying not to do things like work from the bedroom, watch television in there, not watching the news or using phones and so on really close to going to bed, because this will have the opposite effect on that body clock. If we're exposing ourselves to bright light in the evening or exercising in the evening, that will work against us being able to get to sleep, because it will suppress the hormone of melatonin, which is useful for us feeling sleepy. Alcohol and caffeine, they're big players in our sleep, and I think again, we're seeing reports of people drinking a lot more alcohol, or maybe on a daily basis rather than just on the weekends and so on, and this can have an impact. It can help us to fall asleep and maybe make us feel more relaxed, but it can come back with a vengeance in sleep and really disrupt again that dreaming sleep, the REM sleep. So people quite often have even more crazy nightmares if they're drinking alcohol at the end of the night. So we've also got, there's some relaxation techniques on our sheets. So again, this includes trying to avoid using the news and the devices and so on, but kind of coming up with more mindful moments and reading quietly and so on. But I think the main thing is, like I said, not to panic. It is a unique situation, and part of the changes to our routines, as well as the dreaming and so on, is part of us adapting to that situation. But it is useful to acknowledge, as I said, we know that sleep's really important for our immunity and for healing and so on. So as we move into this, and especially for older people where isolation may go on for longer, that maintaining good sleep can help us to adapt, but also to defend against disease and support healing if they do become unwell. And so finally, I just want to say, our research in this area, we've just launched a sleep and COVID survey, which is also available on our website, and that's open to all New Zealand adults over 18. So that's we're hoping there to gather how people's sleep routines have changed, as well as how that's different for different situations, work situations, age groups and genders and so on, but also the impact on general feelings of well-being during this time. So it'd be great if people can take part in that and share it away over the next couple of weeks. I'd really appreciate that. And that's all from me.
I'll unmute myself. That's going to help. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosie. Those are some very interesting tips and tricks. Our last speaker for today is Professor Ngaire Kerse. Ngaire is head of the School of Population Health and is recognized as an international expert in interrelated areas of research. Several research teams on maximizing health for older people, falls in older people, and the impact of physical activity on development and disability. She's currently the president of the NZAG and is a principal investigator of the LILAC study. In the 2020 New Year honours, she was appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for service to seniors and health. And she also holds the inaugural Joyce Cook Chair in Aging Well. Today, she'll give a summary of any available learnings from overseas and a brief outline of recommendations on how to maintain social interaction, physical activity, and a sense of wellness through the restrictions necessary to protect vulnerable older people. Off you go.
Okay, thanks, Lara. It's always hard to know how you get introduced, isn't it? But anyway, I'm very happy to be here as the president of the NZAG, and I would invite you all to have a look and join the association. But in the meantime, here is my slides. And I think I'm a GP by background, and I've spent a couple of decades working in residential care. I love this setting and I'm passionate about it. And I think you'll all agree recently that there's been a lot of talk about the relatively small number of clusters that we've got. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about residential care in this situation with COVID. And so we'll just start with just a brief review of the Washington State care home situation. Started with a 73-year-old female with cough, fever, shortness of breath, requiring some oxygen, transferred to hospital. She had existing comorbidities there with coronary artery disease, diabetes, kidney disease, obesity, hypertension. So on admission to the acute hospital, she was obviously feverish, with high fever, tachycardia and tachypnea and hypoxic respiratory failure. It took 4 days for them to test her for COVID, and this is actually quite a common theme for older people, and she tested COVID positive. That one case, after the CDC investigation, led to 129 COVID cases being confirmed. 81 out of the 130 residents at the home were infected, and 27% passed away. 34 of the staff were infected, and there were there was no mortality amongst the staff. And of the visitors, 14 were affected, and 7% passed away. So that all happened over a very rapid period of time, from the 6th of February when the symptoms were first noted, and it was all over by the 5th of March. So the CDC investigation highlighted several factors which were important to that rapid spread and large amount of cases. That staff were working while they were symptomatic, that staff were working in more than one facility, so coming between facilities, that there was inadequate droplet contact protection and eye protection, and that there were challenges in implementing infection control practices because of partly because of an inadequate supply of PPE and other items. And so I think that's very important learnings. Linda Irvine at Somerset shared this information with her. She'd been looking at the report for a national presentation she did to her organisation. So there was also limited testing availability, and there was difficulty identifying people with COVID based on their symptoms alone. So I think that's very important learnings for us going forward. Looking at the deaths reported from the very badly hit area in Italy called Bergamo. Here is Italy, Spain, other areas in Spain, France and Spain. And these are the time periods here. You can see they vary. This is the underlying population, and this is the grey is the usual number of deaths reported. And you can see that this is the reported deaths associated with COVID-19. And this is other additional deaths which were not counted as COVID deaths. And you can see that the not counted deaths exceed the COVID reported deaths in all of these instances. And it was the largest in Bergamo with, I think that's going from 20 to 120, how many percentage increases that it's large. A doubling here and a less than doubling in Madrid, Spain. So I hypothesize, and I know that in Italy they did not count the residential care deaths as part of the COVID deaths. They only counted the deaths that were reported in the acute hospital, and many deaths in residential care were not, very sick patients were not transferred to hospital. So potentially the burden experienced within residential care by within residential to COVID is going to be huge around the world. And I think we've been relatively spared in New Zealand to date. I found this information in The Economist, and there's been to date one published article about deaths in residential care from COVID perspective. So let's just have a quick look at the New Zealand ARC situation. I feel that we are reasonably well prepared. There's roughly 3 stages. Planning. The planning in residential care and retirement villages started early. We can thank many people for that. The organisations that, the ACA and Retirement Villages Association had advice out very early to restrict access, restrict visiting, getting organised, working out communication plans, thinking about how staff and residents could be cohorted to protect. So cohorting staff means that in one wing you have the same staff dealing with that area who don't transfer to other staffs, the other areas within the facility. There was an idea that potentially staff should not potentially work across homes. That's much more difficult to implement, of course. Understanding what to look for, instituting screening, additional cleaning programs. Preventing the disease entry is this area. ARC started before we went to level 4 lockdown by several weeks. An alert phase where actually you're actively looking for symptoms in staff, residents and visitors, those visitors that might be come in, where you're starting to actually test. The urge is to test early. Any symptoms at all, institute a test. And then act immediately when you recognise the symptoms. You don't wait for the response. You don't wait for the results of the test. Involve regional public health early. The objective of this stage is to contain and to prevent any spread. Identify early and prevent spread. Once you have any cases of proven positive swabs, then you declare an outbreak. And the outbreak objectives are to isolate, prevent further transfer, to protect. So there we are with the ideas about managing COVID through in ARC in New Zealand. Now, DHBs have been getting organised rapidly over the last week, realising that there needs to be additional support to residential care. There are ideas that PPE will be able to be accessed and will be sent out. And there are ideas that that there is both support from regional public health and DHB support. So let's think a little bit about how it is for residents. So residents are being protected. They are at home in their residential care situation, but their lives will be different in that residential care situation. In a lot of places, there's no more communal dining, there are no communal activities, people are accessing their rooms and staying in their rooms. They are effectively in isolation, and sometimes the care practices are changed, so they're just receiving essential cares rather than the full range of cares. And so this might mean we're very aware that older people themselves who are vulnerable like this may have a masked presentation with COVID. They may have a change in their behaviour or an increase in their agitation. They may not mount a fever in the same way. They may not really be as short of breath and yet be quite hypoxic. So there is very likely to be delayed recognition. So this is a lesson to us all who are working in aged residential care to be very alert for changes. This guy here is Jack. He was a resident in a Christchurch residential care facility. He's part of his program that we had, and it's great to see him out there walking outside in the sunshine. So our older people in residential care also, we need to attend to them. They still need to listen to things. They still need to talk, thinking about sensory input while they're in this altered state of being in their own homes in residential care. People, even within areas of their home, if they can do walking, they can have exercise programs. You just have to be careful about how you think about the social distancing. Contact from family and whānau is so important. So the methods of contact, the contact doesn't have to stop, but the methods will change, and older people will need active facilitation to maintain that contact. So if it is virtual contact, a big screen with a big picture and a loud voice. The staff have been very proactive in organising this in several facilities that I know of, where family members can book in for a virtual visit, and they can have the grandchildren, you know, playing around, doing things. Older people are easily able to recognise people on a screen and interact with them. So you just have to be careful in person. And then I do think that there are several diversional therapists and activity people who have some very good ideas about ways to keep people busy while they're in residential care. And we should be actively promoting engagement from people like that. And that engagement can be virtual. There are people and staff working in residential care, and they will have one-on-one contact with these older people. And it's very, very important that people get an opportunity to talk, think, and have things to do. Okay, so staff, protecting and attending, they're the people who are doing that. Staff are under a lot of pressure. There is a whole lot more monitoring to do. There is often staff who are absent because any sign of illness, and they will not come. There has been training, drills about putting on your PPE and taking them off. And staff are sometimes restricted from their own activities or their own work patterns of working across facilities. And staff are very worried about bringing the disease in and equally taking the disease home to their own loved ones. So we need to all support these staff as much as we can. Support from primary health care, from GNSs or gerontology specialists, additional communication and ongoing planning and reassurance. Okay, so that's my lot, and I wanted to make sure we had some time for questions, so I will hand back to Lara. Lara, you're muted.
Yeah, not anymore. Thank you so much, all presenters. With your final presentation, Ngaire, that's all 4 presentations, and on behalf of everyone, I think it's fair enough to say thank you all one more time, all speakers. There is indeed some time left for some questions and hopefully some answers. I will start with a question that was directly asked to Ngaire, and I know that he has to leave pretty soonish, so I'll ask him the question first, where Hillary asked for some advice to people who know someone with dementia in lockdown. She says, for example, I have a friend with moderate dementia in lockdown with their care, and I know the care is quite stressed. And she asked for some techniques or resources that can guide chats with people that they know. And I know that he has a good resource up on his screen.
Yeah, I'll share this. I learned about this yesterday. It's called, some of you may know, WAI Support for Dementia. It's actually a free online training program for dementia caregivers. But this is the manual. I'm a bit old-fashioned, so I download that. It's 275 pages, but this covers about 23 lessons on different aspects of caring for a person with dementia. I've read a couple of lessons. They're fantastic. So I really encourage you to have a look at this. Just Google it, you'll find it. Yeah.
I think that that's going to be quite a good resource for lots of people. There are some more questions that came in throughout the presentations. There's a couple of questions about the links for the SAGO and the Otago exercise programs that are currently shared in the chat, so you might have to scroll up a tiny bit to find the links. So that has been all done. And then there is some questions for Rosie. The the questions are, does artificial lighting work as effectively as an alerting signal correcting for brightness? From Catherine.
Yeah, we can do. So we do use like bright light boxes for people who are not able to get out and about. So you might have seen these are used in Northern Europe, where it's have very dark winters. Some people get seasonal affective disorder, so we can use the same for people at home, and certainly you can buy these light boxes that deliver a very high and lux of light, which is kind of the equivalent of going outside. So that does it is an option, and I didn't go into that in my presentation actually, but if people are not able to get out in bright light, or you know, if they're doing their exercises indoors and so on, you know, even just sitting by a bright window or just on the doorstep rather than being in a dark space can all help. And even if it's an overcast day, the amount of light that we get from stepping outside on an overcast day for 20 minutes, half an hour, it's kind of morning tea time, will really help to keep the body clock more robust.
Could you then possibly also, for Judith, quickly tell us how the end of daylight savings affects sleeping patterns?
Ah, yes. So that kind of happened. When did that happen? Last week we all, it's probably not such a big, didn't have such a great impact this year because we were all so distracted by the situation. But as a rule, going into winter, we adjust a lot easier because we get an extra hour in bed. It's a lot easier to stay in bed for an extra hour in the morning than go to bed an hour earlier into the spring. But so usually it does obviously take a few days to adjust, because again, we're getting up at a different time and it takes a day or two for us to re-regulate to the light dark cycle. But certainly I think it might be something that passed us by a little bit last week or whenever it was, because our schedules are all over the place at the moment anyway.
And there was one more question asked for you by Elma. She says, do you have any recommendation to train the circadian clock during the lockdown, or is there any information in the literature on whether different zeitgebers or external cues might have additive effects when administered together to strengthen or make light day cycles in the elder more robust? Would you recommend melatonin at night to diminish fragmented sleep in the elderly?
So light is the number one time giver that we use to keep that body clock regulated. So like I said, being exposed, even if it's just by a bright window or using artificial light helps, or just being able to sit outside and have a cup of tea in the garden in the morning. So that's the strongest. Next is kind of physical and sort of early morning rather than in the evening. Similarly with exercise, so if you're doing your routine exercises, trying to do that again in the mid-morning or so. That all helps, but yeah, all the social interactions, if you can try and keep those routine and the times of day you're eating, it all kind of plays a role. So whatever we're doing in wake will have an influence on how we sleep. Taking melatonin as a supplement is, it's an interesting and kind of controversial one. So melatonin is what's secreted by the pineal gland into the evening, and it helps us to feel sleepy naturally. We only need to actually secrete a little bit, but it's not just useful for sleep, it's also useful for blood pressure and temperature cycles in our immune system and so on. So we don't want to muck around with it too much. It does tend to reduce with aging anyway, and people do take melatonin. You know, some insomniacs take it, or if you've got jet lag and so on. And in America, certainly you can just kind of buy it over the counter. It's not so readily available in New Zealand. It has to be prescribed. The challenge is that we only need a little bit, and quite often the dosage is much more than we need. So we don't know what the long-term effects are on all those other things that it's related to. And so if we are taking a big whack of it, then we're actually desensitizing the area of the brain that's processing it. And then a bit like with using sleeping medications, you might end up needing more and more to have a similar effect. And again, we don't know the long-term effects, but certainly it can, you know, has been shown to maybe impact other hormones and blood thinning and so on. Yes, it's not highly recommended, especially if people are taking sleeping medications as well. And obviously we don't really recommend taking those for a long time. And a lot of older people are now sort of trying to avoid using sleeping medications for similar reasons, because you can, you know, get desensitized to them and need more and more. And that's another reason why I think older people quite often don't approach their GPs about sleep problems, because they think that's going to be what's given to them is a pill of some kind that they don't necessarily want to add to their the medications they're already taking. Did that answer that question? I can't remember. Basically, light's the main thing, yeah, and routines of everything. But yeah, not that I know, light's the key.
Light is key. All right. Debra, a question came in for you from Robin, who's looking to set up an exercise program for club members at home. The problem is, though, that many do not have access to any computers. Would you have any tips, tricks, questions, ideas?
Well, I guess this would be an opportunity to put in the plug for the TV show that's going to be coming out on the 2nd of May. Which isn't just exercise, but it does have an exercise component, because we are aware that people don't have internet access, and so people are looking more at TV as a medium in which people can access it. So TV1 is going to be putting out a show that's going to be Ngaire is involved, and Rosie is involved, and Ngaire is involved, and I'm involved, and Denise Taylor and Liz Binns, and so there's quite a holistic approach to what's going on with COVID-19 for older adults. But the exercise component of that, I would really encourage her to look at that, because it's just 7 exercises that are really part of the Steady As You Go in Otago exercise program.
Good, that's going to be a fantastic resource, I think, on TVNZ. Good. Ngaire, maybe you can highlight something of this. Jen says that she's concerned that older people are possibly going to be asked to stay in isolation for a longer time. Yet social isolation is such a negative thing for them humans, for us humans. Would you like to?
That's a really good question. And look, I do want to acknowledge Orchidia and the Diversional Therapy Association, because they're doing lots and lots of things already in residential care and throughout the older people's groups. So thank you very much, diversional therapists. Woohoo, big ups to them. Now, I think it belongs to all of us in our whole society to think about the older people who will be advised to stay in isolation or stay out of circulation for quite a long time. And I really think that we do have to reach out to our neighbours. Do you know the people in your street? Do you know the older people down there who might not be able to get out so much? Can you have a conversation from the street with them on their front doorstep? Can you drop some food for them or make sure their needs are met? Families who may not be in the same area will need to use virtual conversations. I myself have been ringing up my aunties who live in Southland, and just to make sure that there's as many contacts. And they both say to me, oh my gosh, I've had so many phone calls today because I have a very big family. So I'm sure that's what we're doing. Everybody's doing that. But please everybody make an effort to keep in touch. So older people do not, in my experience, are not likely to reach out for help. They're not likely to want to be a bother. They're not likely to actually recognise that they might be in need of some additional emotional and social support that can come to them from all of us in our society. So that's all of our jobs. And I totally agree with you, Jan, that that's a really important thing as we go through this next stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. That is actually, I know that Ngaire already had to leave us early, but that answers all the questions that came in throughout the question and answer function. There's quite some people that asked if the webinar will become available afterwards, or if they can share any of the PowerPoints. And the good news is that the webinar will become available afterwards on the NZAG website. So hopefully that's going to be helpful enough. If you need anything else, please feel free to contact the presenters through their email addresses. Thank you all for attending the webinar today. I think it was a great success. At one stage I saw that we had about 110 participants. So that's quite amazing, and hopefully we can keep up this kind of activities in the future. Once again, thank you all for being here, and hopefully until the next time.
Thanks, Lara.
Thanks, Lara. Bye.